So Ryan is a senior lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of Otago. He received his PhD in experimental something completed postdoctoral fellowship. I think my printer cut a word off there. Sorry, sir. In the Department of
Experimental psychology.
There you go. Completed in the Department of Psychiatry and Neuroscience at Columbus University in New York City. You got out of there just early enough, Ryan, before ICE came in. For some reason, you said something wrong, threw you out of the country. And we all know Melanie, but as Melanie said to us the other day, it's like there's not a lot of Te Reo interpretation going on today, is there? There's not a lot of that translation work going on under this current government. Melanie is a researcher and writer publishing regularly on Substack, which is what we're going to look at in a second. She hosts the Coherent podcast, which analyzes political and cultural understanding. She's also a Te Reo Maori translator, treaty educator, and a cross-cultural consultant. As we always say, we love being the dumbest in the room, and we are way at the bottom of the barrel in this conversation. So thanks for joining us, Tim. We appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us on. Great to talk to you guys.
Very excited to talk about this. Now, I'm excited to talk about it, but it's quite dense in information as well. So it'll be interesting to see how we kind of flesh it out without kind of welcoming in the new year that we spend that long and doing on it. So we get to the bits and bobs, but let's start by just showing the whānau, because I wasn't lying. It's a great heading. Who wouldn't click on that? New Zealand's Epstein files. It's absolutely perfect. I'll just read the introduction paragraph so people know where we're at. New Zealand's controversial Regulatory Standards Bill 2025 may look like a technical fix, a tidy set of principles to improve lawmaking, and this is largely how its proponents have described it. But documents released under the OIA uncover a more complex reality. The bill is a product of a decades-long project to shape New Zealand's legal foundations using regulation itself as a background. So why don't we just leave it there, us guys, and we throw you the ball, either one of you, and you can give us the introduction as to what we're looking at and what we're talking about, and then we can ask a few questions about it.
Yeah, cool. Using regulation itself as the battleground. So this article, which has taken quite some time to pull together, is based on an Official Information Act request that Ryan Ward did. So it's based on those documents that were released and also further research by both of us. And perhaps I'll just give a bit of an overview and then we can delve into different aspects. So the documents show the influence of significant lobbying by Bryce Wilkinson, who's a senior figure at the New Zealand Initiative in the Ministry for Regulation. So lobbying on all sorts of things, which we can get to later, but also particularly on the detail of the Regulatory Standards Bill and the Ministry's approach to regulation overall. And a core part of his lobbying that was revealed by these OIA documents is with the work of Richard Epstein, who is a fringe American legal scholar. And he came up with the doctrine of regulatory takings, and people might be familiar with the term regulatory takings, which is sort of at the core really of the Regulatory Standards Bill. This concept that when property rights are restricted or constrained by regulation, there should be compensation paid. And so Epstein's doctrine reframes public interest law as a form of harm. And also, the flip side of that is it's a rent-seeking opportunity. So if your property rights into the future, because this can include income and profits into the future, are restrained by regulation, then potentially you could make quite a lot of money out of the compensation if you've been doing speculative investment in areas that might become regulated. We can come back to that as well. So just the background, Epstein's visited New Zealand at least 4 times since 1990 as a guest of the New Zealand Initiative and given over 30 addresses. And he's been talking about a regulatory constitution for New Zealand since at least the end of the 1990s. And so essentially, these documents show really clearly that it's this foreign idea which is imported. And if we implement the RSB in its current form, then New Zealand would be the first country in the world to incorporate regulatory takings into domestic law. And Epstein himself has noted that, New Zealand is a great place to try all this because he sees us as having a lack of constitutional protections for property. So, yeah, it would essentially make us a global experiment ground.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we'll probably get to as well. Why New Zealand? Why New Zealand? But one of the things I got from reading your article is, I'll use a phrase which is a little bit. I mean, it's not a nice phrase, and I acknowledge it's not a nice phrase. But people on the right in the libertarian world would use this phrase. They come across like the biggest welfare queens in the world. They're like these guys who like to smash the welfare state and keep everybody down. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, if you infringe on my rights, gimme. Come on, give me some of that money, government. Gimme. And they go on and on and on and on. And the way you word it is about property rights. And I think, Chewie, that we have seen David Seymour in the last 12 months hit that property rights, those words, more so than anything else he's doing. Like half of his answers, what did you have for lunch? Oh, well, property rights, like every time he just goes there. But the insidious nature that I'll read this paragraph. It says, as one of the most controversial aspects of Epstein's approach is its potential to something regulation, my printer's cut off, I apologize for that, into a source of speculative income, which is what you were just saying. Under its doctrine, any government action that constrains private property rights, whether over land, resources, businesses, intellectual property, leases, licenses, or contracts, could create the expectation compensation should be paid. Now, obviously, that's compensation from the government. That's what I'm saying. It's like these guys who are all like free market and, market decides, and they're like, no, we'll have some of that public money, please. At the same time, it seems very incongruent, those things they're saying and the things they're saying, this is what our philosophy will allow us to do.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think it's a really interesting development of the legal theory because it originally comes from the idea that the government can't take your property, right, without paying you some kind of compensation, which seems like a good thing, in a democracy, that the government can't come in and just kind of seize whatever it wants. Mm-hmm. But then I think where Epstein and other thinkers have kind of really pushed the ball with this is in envisioning any type of government regulation as an infringement on property rights, right? And so, it's just like the sky's the limit, right? Any time you can kind of make a case for regulation infringing on some kind of property rights, and the article says contracts between employers and employees, actual property, if the government limits your ability to develop something in the way that you would like to, right? If their regulation causes you to lose some kind of income or even, it's really far reaching and could have, some really negative impacts.
But this is the thing, right? And you guys need to educate us on this. We had Huhana Linden from the Greens on last week, I think it was. And we realized very quickly under this government, there's a clip up on the YouTube channel if people want to check it out, that the government's pretty keen in confiscating and taking Māori property. Like they've got lots of legislation at the moment that would take that. So it seems like, don't touch our properties. Don't you tell us what to do with our properties. Oh, and whilst you're leaving us alone, we're going to go take Māori property off them. We're going to just, because there's a good reason for that. But don't tell me what to do with my property. There's another incongruity there between what they're saying and what they're doing.
Yeah, I've been reading, or finished reading Epstein's, he's actually got a whole book on regulatory takings called Takings. Very creative title. And he does talk a little bit about this. And so I think it's important to know that this applies to individual property rights. And so there's a differentiation there with traditional Māori rights to property. And he also says that there should be, that it's that kind of concept that government didn't create property rights and people didn't create them, they just exist, and whoever found the property, it's theirs, that kind of first seer. But then that he thinks there should be a statute of limitations. So there's a point at which the first discoverers aren't actually owed any compensation just because other people have it now, kind of thing. So there's some quite wily arguments around that sort of thing, but I definitely think it's a real hypocrisy in that line of thinking. And interestingly, the government's not proposing just compensation for historic land confiscations and has explicitly excluded treaty settlements and the Marine and Coastal Area Act from the Regulatory Standards Bill in two areas in which, just compensation for what has been taken or impaired would probably bankrupt the government.
I've been lucky enough to read the article. I don't know if Chewie's had a chance to get to it. Chewie, you might have some questions that come off the top of the dome here, but one more before we throw to Chewie. I found it concerning that Bryce Wilkinson, so the associate with the New Zealand Initiative, that David Seymour's his portfolio, his department, the Ministry for Regulation, went to him to seek advice. So the Ministry for Regulation was set up, and as you're writing it, the ministry then went to the New Zealand Initiative, or certainly an associate of its, who is now tied up in this Epstein files as well, to seek advice for what they should do. It seems a bit murky. And where are the lines of demarcation between public servant and sort of private entity? It seems concerning.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Wilkinson has long been involved. Both, I mean, he worked in the Treasury, and he's long been involved in the New Zealand Initiative, and he actually was the one who in 2001 kind of wrote the first draft of the Regulatory Standards Bill, which was the Regulatory Responsibility Bill at that time. So, yeah, I mean, on the one hand, and this is, what Seymour has said, well, obviously we would consult with Bryce. He's kind of the architect of this bill, and he's kind of the one who's been thinking about these ideas and things. But I do think what the OIA documents showed, and what we kind of try to convey in the article, is a real sustained campaign that wasn't necessarily transparent, right? That was, Wilkinson was really trying to shape the character and the specific aspects of this version of the bill, right? Mm-hmm. And also, one of the things that we'll be looking at in future pieces is he really kind of drove the recruitment of the chief economist for the Ministry for Regulation as well. Writing the interview questions and sitting in on interviews and things to I think, in a way that pretty much guaranteed that the ministry would hire somebody who was sympathetic to, Wilkinson's and Epstein's views. And I just think, Andrea Vance kind of broke this lobbying story first in the Post, right? A bit ago. And yeah, there's a lot of talk, in the periphery, independent media or whatever, about the need for kind of a lobbying register, which documents, activity around private actors kind of lobbying the government and participating in this way. And I think this just kind of goes to show that this really is a concern, and it's something that the public isn't aware of, but it's these kind of private actors given really high level and preferential access to this kind of legislative process, and I think it's a problem.
Yeah, Chewie, what you thinking?
So, if I could draw a straight line here, we have David Seymour and ACT, who think that Atlas is a complete conspiracy theory, and don't try and pin this on me, has got into government and as part of the coalition agreement negotiated to have a special Ministry of Regulation to cut red tape. And his first order of business is to reach out to the New Zealand Initiative and an extreme edge person that's got some very interesting views on regulation, who has done seminars with Atlas around the world. And this is how we've ended up with the RSB. Is that just like the cliff notes of this whole thing? Because I don't feel like that guy in front of the pinboard with all the red threads being the crazy man here. This seems to be both, well, a little bit hidden, but also once you pull the tablecloth of it, it's all there. Would that be accurate?
I think one of the things with the Regulatory Standards Bill is, and Pat was joking about the clickbait title, and I think it's fair enough that we've got a clickbait title now, because we've had to have titles with Regulatory Standards Bill for like 8 months, and if we've managed that, then I think we deserve an easy run now. But
totally.
But yeah, I think the RSB has been presented as very dry and boring and technical, and we haven't had shared with the public what actually the theoretical background is for the origin of this concept of regulatory takings and what its intention is. And Epstein's really clear that it would invalidate swathes of 18, 19, 20th century law that's anything to uplift the environment or society, or that's redistribution, as this is set to in his world, this should make it very difficult and expensive for government to pass public interest law, and so they'll only do the things which are really critical, which means that much of it won't happen. What we did find out in our research is that Epstein is associated with several of the American right neoliberal think tanks. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. Since the year 2000, he's a visiting scholar at the Manhattan Institute, and he's a regular contributor to Cato Institute publications and has been since the 1980s, for example. So there's definitely, he's got the strong connections there, and I think is highly regarded in those circles and in the circles of those who would like to progress this kind of property absolutism, and probably in various places in the world, but see New Zealand as a great place to experiment. And as we know, we were one of the leading experiment grounds in the 1980s and 90s with the neoliberal reforms, and this is a continuation of that. And I guess what is most concerning is that the actuals behind this haven't been presented, and the thinking and philosophy behind it haven't been presented transparently for people to really consider, do we want to do this? So it's the public debate and awareness of what this actually means, this concept.
So this really... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ron.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, by way of kind of answering, your question of whether or not this is a Cliff's Notes kind of version of it. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I made the OIA request is just because I've got a long-standing interest in kind of the history of the development of these kind of these business think tanks, and kind of how they lobby the government and where their intellectual and philosophical kind of foundations come from. And I think it's real important to know that the kind of philosophy that Seymour and Wilkinson talk about, the democratic rights and classical liberal kind of ideas of freedom and liberty, those had been developed over the last 100 years due to kind of a direct campaign by corporate interests in the United States to find an intellectual foundation for their campaign against government regulation. So for myself, I mean, anytime I hear, David Seymour talk about democracy or classical liberalism, I like my ears just perk up, right? Because if you know the history there, it's just it's democratic speak for a corporate agenda. So I think when the OIA documents came in, and it was clear that since the 90s, this person had come over and was really kind of shaping the thinking around regulation in such a way that you have these really sort of, like Melanie said, property absolutist notions of any kind of regulation the government does is infringing on property rights, right? Nothing is viewed as beneficial. It just really ties right into that kind of just that corporate agenda that, like I said, they've been honing their agenda for at least 100 years, and we're still seeing it. It's still the same playbook, and it just kind of changes its face depending on who's the public figure in front of who's in government at any given time. So yeah, I don't know. That was kind of a roundabout way, I hope, of answering that.
It just makes me think as well, what are we missing? Like, did anyone else do an OIA on this, or was it just you? I mean, you've got in your article, you've got conversations between the parties. Any chance of a chat on the regulatory standards bill this week, or is it safe enough to email you? Hello. It's pretty. It seems like if you hadn't have done this, we wouldn't be talking about this. And then I kind of go, holy crap, what else is happening every single day that no one knows about, that no one's doing an OIO for? It makes me think as well, like you talk in the article about the shift if this kind of policy was to go through. You talk about if the regulatory standards bill was to pass in its current form. And you say in one part of that section of the article, the shift undermines areas like environmental protection, utility, urban planning, labour laws, equity measures, public service, and social policy. All those unimportant things in life. But what I thought of when I read a different part linking back to that, where you said this: the bill was not a central feature of the election campaign, yet with just 8% of the vote supporting ACT, a commitment to pass a Regulatory Standards Act was written into the coalition agreement. Did Luxon know? Did Luxon know the door he was opening? Or is this another example of a terrible politician having any means to an end? I will give up anything to get into that 9th floor of the beehive and then get my knighthood after 3, 6, 9 years. Because we are firm believers when you hear Erica Stanford talking about how the Prime Minister is not responsible for the word out of David Seymour's mouth. We're like, no. If you're the CEO Prime Minister, then the buck stops with you. If you open the door and something breaks, and you have responsibility to that thing breaking. I don't know, this is more an opinion-based question, but did Luxon know? Did anybody know the thing that they've been working on for what you guys are saying is a couple of decades could have done this? And they basically said, yeah, we'll do that as long as I get to be Prime Minister.
$1 million question. Neither of us are jumping in.
You want to go, Mel? Yeah.
Well, look, because I can almost answer it myself. Because if he did know, he's as evil as. And if he didn't know, he's a pathetic waste of space. Which one do you want to pick? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
But this bill has been around since 2001 and was first introduced 2005 or 6. And there's been a task force on it. There's a whole edition of Policy Quarter on it, 15 or so years ago. So there was a lot of information out there. If in negotiations the National Party didn't know about it and wanted to look into it. So I'm not, we have experts like Sir Geoffrey Palmer and Jane Kelsey who've been writing and talking about it for decades. So they could have known. If they didn't know, I think, probably where National and New Zealand First go with the Select Committee report and with what changes, if any, they hold a line on before the second reading will perhaps tell us a lot more about where they stand on it. Both parties are being fairly quiet now, but we do know that New Zealand First and National have both said they're looking to see some changes through the select committee process.
You're in a dark place if you sit back and go, well, Winston Peters might save us. I mean, like, what kind of place are you in? I also want to ask about why New Zealand. You do write a bit about that in there, but why is Epstein experimenting on New Zealand? But maybe before we get off this topic, especially to do with how the government's running, Chewie, you got anything else you want to jump in on that one, this kind of area of the conversation before we move?
I've got to say, I'm a bit stunned. I'm just marinating the whole thing around in my head, so I don't really have any questions. But I'm stunned by this whole thing. This is phenomenal work, and has some really scary consequences. So yeah, no questions.
And I think
it was a lot of work. We've trawled through hundreds of pages of OIA documents.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, I think I want to say too, like, you know, you hinted before that there's like that, you know, spice of conspiracy theory around it, and I want to make really clear that this is really clear and well documented. If you look at the OIA documents, you look at what Epstein's written, but also I've got a quote in here which was from Roger Kerr, who was head of the Business Roundtable, and it was a 2009 interview with RNZ, and he noted that Wilkinson was on the task force exploring the idea of a Regulatory Responsibility Act, and this is to quote, which harks back to some of the ideas we were talking about associated with Richard Epstein. And so in this one sentence in this 2009 interview, Roger Kerr confirms the connections which we had documented from our research and these OIA documents. So the connections are very real. They're not just hypothetical, this could mean this kind of
and hopefully no one's taken what we've said as to meaning this is a conspiracy theory. I guess when you look at it, you can see how some people would go that path, but we're not suggesting that. Am I right as well in thinking that this is the first kind of media interview you've done on this? I know the post's out, but is this the first media interview you've done? Is it like all downhill from here? Jack Tame knocking on your door? Is that what the hope is?
I have talked to a couple of media people who are covering it, but this is the first one to be out. Yeah,
maybe we should.
That's for sure.
Maybe we could ask that question about why. Maybe we could wrap up with a bit of this, unless there's anything else that you guys want to add in. But why New Zealand? Why is this happening in New Zealand? Like I remember we used to be a training space for technology because we were a small country, we were isolated, things like FPOS and that. I remember my sisters doing the OE to the UK and they had nothing like the banking system we did because they'd tested in New Zealand because we were a small enough population, yet big enough to test on, no other countries on our borders. So we were a test case. Is this the same sort of thing? Why New Zealand? Why is Epstein, why is he focusing on New Zealand for this?
Yeah, I was scratching my head about that too, and delve through quite a lot of his writing and his addresses in New Zealand and prefaces he's written for various other, publications. So, and found a bit where he was talking about New Zealand as having a lack of formal constitutional protections for property rights, and so, seeing us as an opportunity. So this. Compensation if property is taken or impaired. This kind of clause is in the American Constitution, and the judges and courts there have interpreted it not in the way he would like it to be interpreted. And so trying to implement his regulatory takings doctrine there, in America, you run into these constitutional hurdles. He thinks judges should strike, and the courts should be able to strike down any legislation which redistributes or impacts property rights and doesn't directly compensate back to the same people whose rights were taken. He views government as having no more rights beyond the particular group of people being represented at that time. So, yeah, he sees New Zealand as being a good test place because we don't have that constitution in that way. And so... Yeah, you go, Ryan.
Yeah, I was going to say, Oh yeah, I was gonna say, there's a little bit right in here that kind of gets to that question, because on the one hand, it's like, okay, well, we don't really have constitutional protections for private property as such. I mean, there is some things in New Zealand law, but also in a 1999 address that he gave to the Business Roundtable, he said, unlike the United States, New Zealand places all legal power in the hands of the sovereign, which kind of, to me, says that as opposed to a place like the US, where it's really, really difficult to get kind of sweeping legislative changes pushed through, it's easier here in New Zealand to do those kind of things. And so, I mean, you've seen, it happened initially in the 80s and 90s with kind of the neoliberal turn, right? There was just a raft of legislation that was pushed through. We've seen it with the coalition government, passing a whole bunch of things under urgency, just rolling back a whole bunch of stuff and doing a lot of things. And so I think our parliamentary system makes doing something like this easier than it would be somewhere else. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why New Zealand is a good test case for this kind of thing. If you can get a government that's favorable to this type of stuff, you can get quite a bit of it pushed through without, legal challenges and things like that to hold it up. So that would be my guess. I don't know that he's ever come out explicitly and said why New Zealand, but he's hinted at those types of things.
We have a pretty active audience, and I know that there'll be people there shocked and kind of think what's going on. And I guess the question we'd always like to sort of wrap up with is where to from here? What can we do? What can the people watching and listening? Is there anything we can do, or do we just need to make people aware of what this actually, do we need to make Mr. Luxon aware, in case he's not, of what this is actually all about?
Yeah, I think the more that people can go read the article, we've got more articles coming out too. We haven't put everything out yet, so follow along and see the follow-up angles as well. But talk to other people about it, and definitely be letting National Party voters and MPs know, because I think, although there'll be strong support there for probably some aspects of the regulatory standards bill, I don't think this kind of property absolutism being an experiment ground for a fringe American legal theory, and the kind of lobbying that's gone on to get it there, I don't think that is necessarily going to sit that well with a lot of national or New Zealand first voters too. And we could see in the documents, for example, that the actual detail that came out in the RSB, there was a discussion between the ministry and Wilkinson about whether property should be defined, and he was kind of like, no, it should be interpreted expansively by the courts, which is Epstein's preference, and other things like pushing for a presumption of compensation for regulatory takings unless Parliament explicitly excludes it. So a lot of the detail has been engaged on through these channels, and really sort of can see that there's been a special level of influence here that is different to what happened through the select committee, where everyone had an opportunity to contribute. I guess those examples of the actual, the actual detail of what's been happening here are useful to share.
Ryan, you were going to say?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I agree with Melanie. Just being aware. For me, one of the toughest things about watching kind of the coalition government, and particularly the ACT Party, and in some ways, Wilkinson's and other people in the New Zealand initiatives talk around the RSB, is just the way that they use language that sounds right and sounds good, but it means something else. So I think it's useful to it's like Melanie's saying, read those kind of articles that can give you a bit of the history of this kind of corporate movement, right? Which I view kind of act as kind of the torchbearers for here in New Zealand, so that you can, when they say things like, equality or liberty, and they talk about property rights, and it sounds good and democratic, you can be a little bit skeptical, right? And I think with the RSB, if it was just about good regulation, then all of these independent bodies, including Seymour's own Ministry for Regulation, who have reviewed the bill and said that it's not good and that should be thrown out, wouldn't have a problem with it, right? And so I think that right there really just kind of shows you that this is an ideological project that has been driven in large part by these kind of special interests in the US and here in New Zealand, that they have something to gain by enshrining property absolutism into New Zealand law.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about good regulation, because it's been rejected by people who are experts in that. So I don't know that there's much we can do at this point, aside from just learning as much as we can about what's really going on and letting our politicians know that we're aware of what's going on, and that is going to, hopefully manifest itself at the ballot box. But yeah, don't lose hope.
I think too, for people that want to engage a bit more actively with it, something that's really helpful is to understand the arguments that are put forward, or the rebuttals when people, when we're saying we don't like this, and they're like, oh, but it's not enforceable. Governments don't have to follow it. And so, there's a lot of those sort of arguments which deflect, but actually don't address the substance. And so, we know it, the governments don't have to follow it, but we've talked before, and I've written about all the layers of soft power in the RSB that essentially look to redefine how regulation is conceived and assessed, and could lay the groundwork for binding legislation in the future. And Epstein himself has said that embedding ideas through norms and language and expectations can prove more effective than immediate legal enforceability, and you can work towards that. So, I think we need to be careful not to know how to engage with those arguments and to rebut them as well is a helpful thing to do.
Hey, Melanie and Ryan, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, and let us know when you're publishing other work so we can see what's going on from here. It's been great to have you on tonight. It's both a little bit scary and great at the same time, but we appreciate you giving us some time. And the link to the Substack article is in the description wherever this video is. On Facebook, it's on YouTube, it's on Twitch, it's in there. People will be able to find it through that. So thanks, guys. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk super soon, yeah?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Great.
Appreciate it.